Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In an American city where social tensions were palpable, Jessica Harper, a successful 38-year-old black lawyer, was returning home after a long day at the firm. She was driving her luxury car, perfectly registered, calmly listening to a legal podcast. As she entered her secure residential neighborhood, a police car abruptly stopped her. Officer Thompson, young, impulsive, and notoriously arrogant, ordered her to stop. Without listening to her explanations about the legitimacy of her presence in the neighborhood, he accused her of suspicion of robbery and began handcuffing her. Jessica, remaining calm, tried to explain her identity and profession, but Thompson would not listen. The arrest seemed increasingly humiliating and unfair, and a crowd began to form, shocked by the treatment of this elegant and obviously respectable woman. What the agent was completely unaware of was that Jessica wasn't just a lawyer. Her husband, Robert Harper, was none other than the director of the FBI, a man respected for his integrity, rigor, and commitment to fighting corruption and abuse of power. When the news reached Robert via a call from the district officer, his reaction was instant and ruthless. With a mixture of anger and determination, he demanded his wife's immediate release. But he didn't stop there. He directly summoned the police chief, threatened strict disciplinary action, and ordered an internal investigation into Officer Thompson. A few hours later, Jessica was released, but the situation had taken on a national dimension. The media, alerted by witnesses and Robert's contacts, began to relay the story of an unjust arrest and abuse of police power. Officer Thompson, humiliated and under investigation, found himself in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. But the most surprising thing was Jessica's reaction. Rather than remain in the shadows, she decided to file a complaint for discrimination and abuse of power, publicly exposing the flaws and persistent biases within the police department. With Robert at her side, their relationship became a symbol of justice and resistance to abuse, and the incident was widely reported across the country. The city, and even the country, was witnessing an unexpected lesson: no one is above the law, and the arrogance of the established powers can turn against those who wield it. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the residential neighborhood of Maplewood. Jessica Harper, dressed elegantly in a light gray suit, drove quietly in her Tesla. The streets were quiet, almost silent, and everything seemed normal. Suddenly, blue and red flashing lights illuminated her vision. A police car pulled up behind her, honking its horn. Jessica slowed down, her heart pounding slightly. Officer Thompson stepped out of his vehicle, his expression set, his hand on his service weapon. "Madam, could you stop, please?" he said curtly. "Of course, officer, but may I ask why?" Jessica asked calmly. "You fit the description of a robbery suspect in this area," he replied with a slight chuckle. Jessica showed her lawyer's badge and her registration card, both in order. She explained that she had lived here for several years and had nothing to reproach herself for. But Thompson would hear none of it. He was convinced that his authority and instincts were enough to justify his actions. Within seconds, Jessica found herself handcuffed in front of her own car. Neighbors came out of their homes, shocked by the scene. An elderly woman shouted, "What are you doing to this lady? She hasn't done anything." But Thompson, irritated by the attention, replied curtly, "Step back. This is a police matter." Jessica remained calm, even though her heart was pounding. She thought about her husband, Robert, and wondered how he would react when he heard this. But for now, it was impossible to know. As she was led to the patrol car, a neighbor pulled out his phone and began filming. The first videos were already circulating on social media. "Black lawyer arrested in her neighborhood for nothing," some headlined. The public humiliation was setting in, and Jessica could only hope for swift justice. Behind the scenes, Thompson was completely unaware of who Jessica Harper really was and the shockwave her actions would cause. Minutes after Jessica's arrest, Robert Harper was in a meeting in the FBI's state-of-the-art offices in Washington, D.C. His files were scattered in front of him, but his phone buzzed insistently. "Robert," said a breathless voice on the other end of the line, "it's Jessica." She's been arrested by the Maplewood police. Robert's heart raced. He knew his neighborhood and knew Jessica could never have committed a single crime. His instincts told him this was a blatant mistake, even an act of discrimination. Stay calm, he told the agent on the phone. Write down exactly where she's being held. I'll take care of it. In less than 10 minutes, Robert had summoned one of his most trusted deputies and directly contacted the Maplewood police chief. His voice, firm and icy, echoed through the receiver. Release my wife immediately. And ensure that the officer responsible is subject to an internal investigation. Robert's words weren't suggestions, they were orders, and everyone knew that no FBI official messed with the director. Meanwhile, in Maplewood, Jessica watched the passers-by whisper and film. She felt the injustice weighing on her, but hope grew within her. Robert would intervene. She knew he would never accept his wife being humiliated like this. Moments later, senior officers arrived on the scene. The atmosphere changed instantly. Agent Thompson, visibly nervous, looked at his phone, a direct call from the FBI director. The orders were clear and non-negotiable. Jessica was released almost immediately, her handcuffs removed, and her rights restored. The crowd around her applauded timidly, but the humiliation had taken its toll. She knew she couldn't let this injustice go unnoticed. Back at her house, Robert and Jessica finally reunited. Their embrace was brief but intense. No words were necessary, they both knew that this situation went far beyond a simple unjust arrest. We'll see this through, Robert murmured, squeezing her hand. Yes, they need to understand that no one is above the law, Jessica replied, her eyes shining with determination. Thus began a battle that would not be confined to Maplewood, it would shake the police, the city, and even the entire country. The next morning, Jessica Harper showed up at her law office. She was dressed modestly, but her expression reflected unwavering determination. The humiliation of the day before was still fresh in her mind, but she knew she had to turn this injustice into concrete action. Robert told me to stay calm and not rush into anything, she told her assistant, but this case needs to go to court, and quickly. Her team immediately mobilized to prepare a formal complaint against Officer Thompson and the Maplewood police. Every detail of the arrest was recorded, neighbors' videos, witness statements, and documentation proving that Jessica was living legally in the neighborhood and that her car was in good standing. Jessica also decided to go public with the story. She wrote a clear and powerful statement, denouncing not only the unjust arrest but also the latent racism and abuse of power within some police forces. I don't just want justice for myself, she said, I want this to serve as an example and for no one else to go through what I went through. Local media immediately picked up the story, and soon national networks were broadcasting the footage and eyewitness accounts. Social media went viral, "Black lawyer arrested in her own neighborhood" became a viral hashtag. Meanwhile, Agent Thompson, overwhelmed by media pressure and incessant calls from the FBI, was beginning to feel the consequences of his actions. His once promising career was now in jeopardy. Jessica, for her part, kept her dignity intact. She knew the battle was only just beginning, but with Robert at her side and the public's growing support, she felt ready to face any obstacle. This scandal went far beyond a simple arrest, it would reveal systemic failings, expose police arrogance, and remind the country that no one is above the law. The Jessica Harper case had now spread beyond Maplewood. The national media seized on the story, relaying every detail and every video of the unjust arrest. Social media was ablaze, demanding justice and denouncing police abuse. In the Maplewood office, Officer Thompson was under pressure. His phone was ringing off the hook, his superiors were calling him to account, and he was beginning to realize that his impulsive decisions had sparked a media storm. The anger he had felt when he arrested Jessica was now turning into anxiety and fear. I was just following protocol, he protested at an internal meeting, but his words seemed hollow in the face of the evidence of the videos and the damning testimony. Meanwhile, Jessica and Robert worked closely together to prepare for the next step. Robert knew that a simple complaint wouldn't be enough, the case needed to draw attention to the abusive and discriminatory practices of certain officers. We need to move beyond the complaint, Robert explained to Jessica. The public needs to understand that this is a systemic problem, not an isolated incident. Jessica nodded. She began drafting a broader statement, documenting not only her arrest but also other similar incidents in the city. She contacted civil rights groups to include them in the package and prepared press conferences. Tensions escalated when Thompson received an official summons for an internal investigation. He realized his career, and even his reputation, were at risk. At the same time, the entire city was in turmoil. Residents gathered outside the police station, some to support Jessica, others simply to observe the incident that had shaken their neighborhood. Reporters flocked, and Thompson's every move was filmed and commented on. Jessica, however, remained calm and determined. With Robert by her side, she knew justice would be done, but she also wanted the truth to come to light. The case would become a symbol, injustice could no longer be ignored, and those who abused their power must be held accountable. 2 days after the incident, Jessica and Robert Harper held a national press conference at a prestigious hotel in Washington, D.C. The room was filled with reporters, cameras, and photographers, all eager to cover the story that had rocked the country. Jessica stepped onto the stage, calm and dignified. Her gaze fell on the crowd, then on the cameras. Robert, standing at her side, projected a protective but authoritative presence. "Thank you all for being here," Jessica began. "Yesterday, I was arrested in my neighborhood, at home, for no valid reason. This act was not only a personal humiliation, it was a violation of fundamental rights." She played the footage of her arrest and the neighbors' testimonies, clearly showing the injustice and abusive behavior of Officer Thompson. The room fell silent, captivated by the power of her testimony. "This isn't just an individual issue," she continued. "It's a systemic problem. Too many people in this country are subjected to unjust and discriminatory arrests. Too many lives are shattered by the abuse of power." Robert then spoke. "As FBI director, I cannot remain silent in the face of such injustices. We have contacted local authorities and launched a full investigation. The agent responsible will face full consequences for his actions. No citizen should ever be treated this way." Media coverage was instantaneous. Videos of the conference, featuring Jessica's calm, determined voice and Robert's authority, circulated on social media and news channels. The response was overwhelming: popular support, debates on police reform, and harsh criticism of Thompson. In the days that followed, the pressure on Officer Thompson became unbearable. His superiors summoned him several times, and he was forced to testify before the police disciplinary board. The career he thought was solid and secure was beginning to crumble before his eyes. For Jessica and Robert, this conference was just the beginning of a campaign for justice. They knew the road would be long, but they had transformed Jessica's humiliation into a national cause, reminding everyone that courage and truth can triumph over the abuse of power. In Maplewood, Officer Thompson was beginning to feel the weight of his mistakes. The arrest videos, witness accounts, and the national press conference had put his career in jeopardy. His colleagues were whispering behind his back, and even his superiors seemed to be losing patience with him. At the hearing before the police disciplinary board, Thompson attempted to defend himself, arguing that he had only followed protocol. "I acted according to procedure. I thought I was acting to protect the neighborhood," he said, his voice trembling. But faced with irrefutable evidence, videos, audio recordings, and testimony from neighbors, his defense collapsed like a house of cards. The council members stared at him in disbelief. "You have not only failed in your duty, you have abused your power and caused serious harm to an innocent citizen," declared the council president. "Your behavior is unacceptable and cannot go unpunished." Meanwhile, Jessica and Robert observed the situation from a distance. They knew that procedural justice was taking its course, but they were also preparing a complementary action, an awareness campaign on abuses of power in the police and systematic racial discrimination. Thompson, humiliated, began to understand that this case would forever mark his career. Every news report, every social media post reminded him of his failure. Appeals from the public, civil rights groups, and even the national media made him feel as if the whole of society was judging him. Behind the scenes, Robert and Jessica were planning the next step, they would turn this partial victory into a national message, showing that abuse of power and racism could no longer be tolerated, even in the smallest towns. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: Thompson had lost control, and Jessica and Robert were gaining influence and legitimacy with every move. A few days after Thompson's disciplinary hearing, Jessica Harper decided to take the next step in her campaign for justice. She organized a meeting with several victims of police abuse in a large conference room in Washington, D.C. The media was invited to cover the event, to give visibility to the testimonies and show that her case was not isolated. Among the participants were men and women of all ages, all scarred by unjust arrests or public humiliations. Some still bore visible scars, others shared the psychological aftereffects of their experience. Jessica spoke, setting the scene for the event. "Today, we're not just talking about my story," she said, her voice firm. "We're talking about millions of citizens who suffer abuse of power and discrimination. Their voices must be heard." Each victim took the stage in turn, recounting their experiences with courage and dignity. Cameras filmed intently, reporters transcribed every word, and social media exploded once again. Jessica's story was transforming into a national movement, a symbolic fight for civil rights and against injustice. Robert Harper, standing behind her, watched the scene with pride and vigilance. He knew that the media impact would increase the pressure on local authorities and the already discredited Officer Thompson. Agent Thompson, meanwhile, was following events from a distance. Each testimony was a further blow to his reputation. He began to understand that his arrogance and haste had triggered a reaction he could never control. At the end of the meeting, Jessica concludes, "We will not allow these injustices to continue. We will fight for every person, and we will ensure that abuses of power are punished." This sends a clear message: no one is above the law. The room erupted in applause. For Jessica, this moment wasn't just a personal victory, it was the beginning of a true movement for justice and equity, one that would resonate far beyond Maplewood and change the way society viewed authority and responsibility. A few weeks after the conference and the meeting with the victims, Officer Thompson realized that his career was seriously compromised. The media and public pressure was not abating, and he was beginning to feel the weight of his actions. In a last-ditch effort to protect himself, Thompson attempted a public redemption approach. He issued a clumsy statement apologizing for Jessica's arrest and claiming he had acted without malice and acknowledged his mistakes. "I deeply regret what happened. My intention was never to cause harm," he wrote. But his apology rang hollow and opportunistic. The media and civil rights groups immediately criticized it. For Jessica and Robert, the gesture only confirmed that Thompson had never understood the extent of his abuse of power. Robert, observing the audience's reaction, whispered to Jessica, "He doesn't understand that it's not just his mistake, it's a whole system that he represents." Jessica, calm but resolute, decided it was time to take the final step, a full legal action against the officer and the department, bolstered by national support. With the help of her team of lawyers and Robert, she prepared a solid case that included all the witness statements, videos, and documentation of the abuses of power. The decisive moment came when they announced the public lawsuit. The media broadcast the announcement live. Jessica Harper, accompanied by the FBI director, would file a formal complaint against Thompson and the Maplewood Police Department for discrimination and abuse of power. The news sent shockwaves through the country. Thompson, already weakened, found himself isolated and discredited. His clumsy apologies were no longer enough to calm public opinion or protect his career. Jessica, on the other hand, emerged stronger than ever. She had turned her humiliation into a national campaign for justice, demonstrating that truth, dignity, and courage can overcome even the most arrogant abuses of power. A few months after the lawsuit was announced, Officer Thompson's trial began in Maplewood City Courthouse. The courtroom was packed with journalists, civil rights activists, and city residents who had come to witness the case, which had become a national symbol of the fight against abuse of power. Jessica Harper entered the room confidently. Beside her, Robert Harper exuded natural authority and commanded respect. Thompson, on the other hand, looked nervous and isolated. His superiors were present, but no one seemed willing to openly defend him. Jessica's attorney opened the trial by presenting the evidence: videos of the arrest, testimony from neighbors, Jessica's statement, and documents showing that Officer Thompson had acted without legal authority and with blatant bias. Each piece of evidence reinforced the narrative of injustice and highlighted the police department's abusive practices. Officer Thompson not only violated my client's rights, the lawyer said, he violated the fundamental principle that all citizens should be treated with respect and dignity. When Thompson took the stand to defend himself, his previous arrogance only turned against him. The evidence and testimony were overwhelming, and every sentence he uttered reinforced the impression that he had no real understanding of his responsibilities. The climax came when Jessica was called to testify. In a calm but penetrating tone, she explained the emotional and psychological impact of the arrest, as well as the fear and humiliation she had felt. The entire room fell silent, touched by her dignity and strength. Robert Harper, who had been discreet until then, intervened to clarify the role of the FBI and show that his support was not only personal but also symbolic. Justice must be applied to all, without exception. At the end of the trial, the judge delivered his verdict: Thompson was guilty of abuse of power and discrimination, and he was suspended, followed by a process of dismissal from his position. The victory was not only for Jessica, but for all victims of similar abuse across the country. In the courtroom, Jessica and Robert exchanged a look of silent triumph. They had transformed a personal humiliation into a national message, reminding them that courage and truth could overcome injustice and arrogance. A few weeks after the verdict, Jessica Harper's life had changed, but she remained true to herself, determined, elegant, and deeply human. The legal victory marked a turning point not only for her and her husband, Robert, but for the entire town of Maplewood and beyond. Media coverage of the case raised public awareness of abuses of power and systemic discrimination. Local reforms were announced to improve officer training, strengthen internal oversight, and create safe channels to denounce injustices. Jessica and Robert were invited to participate in national conferences, sharing their experiences and inspiring other citizens to stand up for their rights. For Thompson, the fall had been brutal. His career was over, and his reputation destroyed. He had become a tragic example of arrogance and the abuse of power, a reminder that no one is above the law. But for Jessica, revenge wasn't the main focus. She focused on the positive and lasting impact of her fight. She founded an organization dedicated to defending victims of police abuse, providing legal advice, psychological support, and media visibility to citizens facing injustice. Robert, at her side, used his influence to support reform initiatives and ensure that the message of justice and fairness reached all levels of the system. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through the Maplewood neighborhood, Jessica turned to Robert. "Look at all we've accomplished," she said with a smile. "Yes," he replied softly. "But this is only the beginning. The real change begins now." Jessica's eyes shone with a glimmer of satisfaction mixed with determination. What they had been through together had proven one thing: dignity, courage, and truth can triumph over injustice, and a single act of resistance can spark a movement capable of changing the world. Jessica Harper's story became a symbol, reminding everyone that no one should accept injustice in silence, and that real power lies in perseverance, truth, and justice.